Justice! Now! Justice! Now! Justice! Now! Justice! Now!
All the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Oh yeah! What the So many different issues that have been happening, not only recently, but definitely recently within our communities, that speak to a culture in the police department that is fed by racial disparities and racial profiling. We want all of our communities to be treated fairly and the same. There is a systemic sickness in the city of Medicine. Once known for encompassing both Black Wall Street and the American Tobacco Company, Durham continues to be highlighted nationally as America's most tolerant city, 1 out of 25 best places to retire in the U.S., and the tastiest town in the South. According to a report by UNC professor Frank Baumgartner, Black motorists in Durham are more than 200% more likely than white motorists to be searched by law enforcement as a result of routine traffic stops. Black suspects in Durham are 9 times more likely than white suspects to be incarcerated for criminal conduct. This statistic places Durham at the highest level of racial disparities in North Carolina's 100 counties. While no single individual is responsible for a systemic sickness, the Durham Police Department is committing a social malpractice when it refuses to acknowledge practices which allow for implicit biases to dehumanize specific residents. As with any diagnosis of a systemic sickness, we want to be specific as possible about the symptoms which have pointed us to this concern. 1. During preparation for an early July news conference on a recent string of shootings, Durham's Chief Lopez allegedly said all the recent victims had been Black and involved in criminal activity. One assistant chief pointed out that one of the victims was a lawyer. Lopez responded by saying that the lawyer deserved to get shot because he was a public defender.
My name is Dave Hall. I'm in the manifesto tonight as the attorney that was shot and the attorney that received the alleged comments made by Chief Lopez to the City Council. We hope that they will engage this process, engage us as a community so that we can begin to work towards equity, to alleviate this disparate and disproportional treatment that we find in our communities. I want to take a moment that we recognize young Mr. Farrell in Charlotte, who was killed by the Charlotte Police Department yesterday. It's another tragic event that again illustrates that the fight has to go on, that it's not only Durham, and hopefully we can spread our fight to other cities across North Carolina and work towards racial equity.
When Jose Ocampo, a Honduran father, was fatally shot by a Durham police officer, Chief Lopez publicly sanctioned the shooting prior to an official investigation, even though Mr. Ocampo's neighbors had a different accounting of the events.
All the things that you've been hearing point to a problem within our society, within our government, and within our police department. Too often we see the bias of people that affects the job that they're supposed to do. Too often there is a culture that takes root in the organizations that can be destructive to the organization and to the people they serve. On July 27th, across the street from my home, Jose Ocampo was gunned down. And later that day, A friend of mine was at a restaurant and she heard a police officer say this. He pulled out a knife, ain't nobody got time for that, and he pulled out his finger, mimicking as if he's shooting someone. Ain't nobody got time for that. If it were your brother, if it were your neighbor, would you have time to come to a solution that would not take the life of someone? I say that we need to encourage our police officers to take the time. When it comes to running over the rights of black and brown people and poor people, and not wanting common citizens to know their rights because it might make your job more difficult, but you tell your children and your friends and family what are their rights, don't you think you need to take time for that? When it comes to listening to the folks of the community and engaging them in a way that respects them, to take on community policing in a way that values the people of the community, we no longer sit by while you contemplate whether you have time for that. And lastly, when you come into a community and assume just because a person chooses to live in a community that they are doing something wrong or illegal, instead of taking the time to see individuals and people and not making assumptions, we demand that you take time to see us and not make assumptions about us. You must take time for that.
Carlos Riley Jr., a young African-American brother and son, was targeted and unjustly pulled over by a Durham police officer and found himself fighting for his life in the front seat of his own car. And now, months later, Riley remains in prison on a $1.5 million bond. This speaks to a sickness in the culture of the police department and raises profound questions about systemic departmental policies. We, the community of the other Durham, demand an empowered seat at the table as we collectively begin this urgent work of reconciliation so that all Durham's residents can experience the benefits of our robust city.
To connect with the citizens of the communities that are often over-policed, under-policed, and seek training that will equip them to understand the dynamics of race and privilege and can be addressed and move us closer to collaboration and changing the dynamics that brings fear and distrust. I believe we all must take time for that.
Fire! We are from the fire, living in the fire. Go back to the fire, turn the world around. We are from the fire, living in the fire. Go back to the fire. Shake somebody else's hand. Do I know who I am? Do I know who you are? See, we wanna know. Fire! Fire! Living in the fire, go back to the fire, turn the world around. We are from the fire, living in the fire, go back to the fire. The mountain!
We need police now that are genuinely interested in the affairs of the people whom they are policing. This is the part of the training that's being left out because we can't train your hearts. We can give you certain disciplines, but we can't train your heart. We hope that Chief Lopez and those who are also in positions of authority are paying good attention, because from what we've read in the manifesto, we have to agree it's just and it's reasonable. I hadn't read anything that's unreasonable. So you have to give the citizens some voice, some sway, and what I've read in these statistics is very clear to me that justice, unfortunately at this time, is not colorblind.
Beautiful.